Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Max Holloway of going on holiday, Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast. And I've been away for a week, and in that time, not an awful lot has happened, but I've missed the chance to give my views on some fights, and I'm going to do that now. But thank you very much to the people who commented and emailed me, being like, "Where are you? What's happened? Are you okay?" Yeah, no, I'm fine. I just had to go out of town for a bit. Not laying low or anything, just had to go out of town for a bit. And while I was out of town, I did some planning for just some stuff I'm doing. So I'm rebuilding the studio. I say studio, it's not really a studio, it's a computer and some badly stacked soundproofing and a microphone. But I've ordered myself a ton of new stuff. I've decided I'm going to convert it into an actual studio. And we're going to hopefully up the production quality of this podcast. Unfortunately, that does require me learning about how to do the production on a podcast. But, it's always fun. I enjoy taking things on and trying to learn them for myself. Like, I could have had much more success on YouTube when I'm doing my videos by hiring a video editor or something like that. But I enjoy learning how to do those things. Learning new skills. That's what life's about. And the other thing I'm going to do is that I want to give the Patreon boys more. Because at the moment I'm sort of getting out 2 articles a month, which, it's an okay rate, but I feel like I want to do more for the Patreon boys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my workload on the podcast. Monday's going to be recap podcast. Thursday's going to be a preview podcast as usual, but also going to do news for the week, talk about some of the biggest stories going on. So we'll get into all the shit I always moan about the UFC and Bellator and all that stuff. And we'll probably do a bit of fight history too. And we'll just bring it out to a longer, better structured podcast. Monday, probably still going to be sort of informal. But Thursday, I want to do a bigger thing for the Patreon boys. I'll probably still put some of it up on YouTube and on the usual podcast feed for, everyone, because I don't like paywalling content, but equally I want to give the people who support me, extra shit. So that's the plan. Let me know if that's really egregious, and I'll probably walk it back. But until then, we'll just go forward like this. We're going to do sort of like a double recap episode this week because it's basically 2 weeks I missed. Oh, by the way, I got an article up just before I went away, which I haven't been able to plug yet. Advanced Striking 2.0 Igor Vovchanchin. And as I was watching these fights, both the UFC and Bellator, it was linking in nicely with a lot of the things I discussed in the Vovchanchin article, even things that were just sort of in passing, like US versus Soviet boxing during the Olympics through like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But we'll get into that in a minute when we're talking about like Vicente Luque versus Michael Chiesa. I bet you didn't expect that to be the one that I'm talking about. But I'm just going to hit the fights that I liked from this weekend. We'll start with the obvious one, Cyril Gane versus Derek Lewis. Basically, I think we all expected this. Like, either Derek Lewis is going to get the shit kicked out of him and catch him, or he's going to get the shit kicked out of him and basically fold. And I think that's the thing. Like, where Francis Ngannou is the big monstrous hitter and a great counterpuncher, and he did look good with his jab in the Miocic fight, he's definitely not the sort of point scoring fighter that Gane is. And when I say point scoring, I mean clean single shots from the outside. But it's one thing, I'm just picturing someone standing with their arms folded in front of Cyril Gane, getting their head jabbed back and being like, oh, he's a point fighter, while they're losing brain cells. But point fighting as in like sharpshooting, that sort of style of fighting. Because if you're, 6'4" and 250 pounds, and your fists are like 14, 15 inches in circumference, you point fighting with the jab in 4-ounce gloves is going to fucking hurt. And you saw that in the fight. He's scoring the jab off both hands, both stances, absolutely phenomenal. And he's landing square on the bulb, as they used to call it in the old days, but literally Derek Lewis's closed eye. And Derek Lewis, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I have, like against Junior Dos Santos, he got body shotted, pretended to be hurt, and then came back. But he was calling, like he was extending his arms with his fingers out, like Frankenstein. Every time Gane stepped in, Gane was jabbing him clean in the face with a balled fist, and Lewis was complaining that he'd been jabbed in the eye. And this, I've seen this happen before. If you watch Ponzinibbio versus Magny, Ponzinibbio is so accurate with his jab; it's going right in the guy's eye. Functionally, it's pretty similar. It's just that one is legal, and thumbing someone's eye or putting a finger in their eye is illegal. But yeah, Magny was convinced that Ponzinibbio was poking his eye. They're showing the replays. It's just the ball fist going straight knuckle first into his eye. And then you saw the other usual Gane looks, the low line side kick, or rather southpaw, lead leg low line side kick, lead leg teep, and lead leg inside crescent kick to the face. But that inside crescent kick, he's now brought it down to the body. He's doing like a Gyaku Moshigiri inside out kick, but he's landing with the ball of his foot to the guy's belly. And the effect of it is that he can sort of throw it like a stabby sort of teep, but it comes up at 45, 30 degrees outwards towards his shoulder. So Lewis is trying to slap that kick inwards and come back with the overhand, and he can't because it's just coming at a weird angle where it's not like a straight line towards him where he's just parrying it offline. So that was really interesting. If you watch that fight again, it's been a while now, but he's throwing that inside out kick, but not to the head. He's throwing it to the body with the ball of the foot. In fact, it replaced his teep at a lot of points in that fight. Threw some nice rear leg front kicks to the body. Threw a lot of nice low line side kicks and lead leg step up low kicks. Kicked the shit out of Lewis's leg. We said that like in the JDS fight, in the Mark Hunt fight, even in his last one against Curtis Blades, he can't get out of the way of a fucking low kick. And dudes are not doing it enough. It's a free, almost debilitating strike. If the guy just stands there and takes them, and Lewis has bad knees and a bad back anyway, and you need your legs to throw power. But yeah, he's just chopping those down. It was interesting because I thought he'd try and draw Lewis forward more, but he was very happy taking the centre of the cage, pushing Lewis back to the fence. Lewis was, of course, happy waiting by the side of the fence, hoping to catch him coming in, but he just couldn't. Lewis's corner advice was truly strange. It was up there with Dean Thomas and him always. I mean, I respect Dean Thomas enormously. He's actually got a really good instructional out on Fanatics. But whenever he's cornering Tyron Woodley, Tyron Woodley comes back to the corner, and this is even when it was prime Tyron Woodley. He was never a guy who threw combinations or did more than one thing at once. And Dean Thomas is like, I need those combinations. I need 3 or 4 punches at a time. You're going when has he ever done that? But this was even worse because Derek Lewis's corner, I understand you want to give him some information, and I think some information could change his fights, to be honest. But they're giving him tons. They're just it's like if you watched him on the pads and you go, oh, that's shit. This, and this need to change. And you try to do it while he's getting his ass kicked by possibly the fastest heavyweight going. One of the best technicians at heavyweight on the feet ever. And you're trying to give him day one pointers, but he's not fixed at this point. So how's he going to fix them mid-fight? There was a couple of good things in there. He was you need to take your feet with you. You're leaning forward, and he's getting away because you're leaning forward and trying to chase him when you need to get your feet underneath you. But he was given that in a batch of 5 different instructions. And the instructions always included, oh, you can't be backing up. You're what? His entire career has been him backing up and then catching people coming forward. Thinking of other stuff I liked about Gane's performance, I knew this fight would have one of those moments where the guy bum rushes at you, you get caught a little bit out of position, you maybe hit the fence and you run out the side door, and in the course of covering ground quickly, you turn away from them, and it was like John Jones did it against Rampage Jackson. Rampage Jackson never had him close to in trouble in that fight. And people got that gif of John Jones running away from him, and they were like, oh, what a pussy, oh, got owned, almost knocked out by Rampage. And you're like, oh, God. And you knew everyone would gravitate to this, because everyone was coming in wanting Lewis to win. Lewis was the fan favourite within Texas. It happened a couple of times, but it happened, Lewis would grab a hold of him and shuck his way to the back or just have a body lock. Gane would turn his back and start separating the hands. So you have to turn your back to do that. Like the people who fall back on like, oh, you can't do that in boxing. You're penalised for cowardice or whatever if you show your back. Yeah, but you show your back to separate the hands and break away from a clinch in MMA. You know, it's pretty fucking common. But yeah, I mean, the case was that Gane, you just had to look at the difference between their stance. Lewis is leaning on his back leg and then trying to throw himself onto his forward leg. Anytime he comes forward and tries to pursue, he's leaning on his front leg already. Whereas Gane is, his feet are like, if you drop a plumb line from his taint, you know, the center of gravity through the middle, if you drop a plumb line from his taint, it lands between his legs evenly, you know, and his head is over the top of his hips. Basically, his head and his whole upper body and his hips are in the middle between his feet. And it's very side-on, very long-bladed stance. And that means that he can push off his back leg or his front leg and move very, very quickly in those forward and backward dimensions. The problem that could occur, but probably won't at heavyweight, is the issues with the linearity of that style. If you stand very bladed and you burst in and out and you do that sort of fencing on a line or points fighting stuff, you can have trouble when guys start circling around. But consider where he fights. It's probably not going to happen. This is the interesting thing, because I always said, like, while he was coming up, I don't know how well that's going to age. You know, can he do that for 3 to 5 rounds? Can he stay on the balls of his feet and do it? Turns out he can. So now, like, no one has the answer for it. You could get sideswiped. He could get sideswiped by Francis Ngannou, but like that, I mean, Ngannou's a better counterpuncher, but that is very similar to what everyone else has already been trying to do. You know, catch him from the side while he's coming in straight. But you saw Gane do what he used to do in kickboxing, you know, close to the clinch, land a good knee or two, smother the guy, push him away. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it was all very encouraging. Excited to see him versus Ngannou now. When I watched the event, I did watch the event just after it happened, but I refreshed my memory on some of the fights just now today. But when I watched the event, I feel like they didn't really touch on the Ngannou thing at all, which was very weird. You know, like you could normally build a storyline about that, but they just pretended that he didn't exist. Very strange. But now you got Ngannou versus Gane pretty much assured. You know, two giant French dudes, giant jacked French dudes, speaking in French and complimenting each other. I mean, that's how you get the ladies into the fights. But yeah, I mean, this just comes off on, what's his name? Is it Lopez? Fuck, can't remember his name. Not going to look it up. Apologies to him, but whoever it is at the Paris Fight Factory, to find these two, yes, good athletic talents, who've had very different paths in life, but find two of them and turn them into world-class MMA heavyweights in such a short period of time. Truly incredible. You know, I don't know how the Paris Fight Factory is doing generally on the MMA scene in Europe. I've probably seen them at like the Cage Warriors events and things and just not clocked it. But to produce two world-class heavyweights so quickly, one after the other, is incredible. And it comes down to like, because there is always this degree of like, oh, did a coach get lucky when a fighter came along? You'll hear a lot of that about Straight Blast Jim Ireland, John Kavanagh. You know, very important person in the Irish MMA sphere, in the Irish grappling sphere, and ultimately like the British and European as well. But people often accuse him of like, you know, you can just look at the careers of his fighters and none have even come close to what Conor McGregor achieved. And then there's that sort of like, oh, did you sort of catch lightning in a bottle? Was it a flash in the pan? Other cliches. But yeah, this guy, is it Lopez? Fuck, can't remember his name. But he's managed to do it twice in quick succession, so that's incredible. Other good stuff. Jose Aldo. Everyone wanted me to rave about Jose Aldo. I'm going to rave about Jose Aldo. How good is this lad? We talked about it before the fight. I said Pedro Munhoz's things are a low kick, which he's had forever, and then he just moved it down below the knee. Like, he used to just lead with the right low kick to the thigh and have to stand closer to people, and now he just does it lower, below the knee. And a jab. And he came out ready to throw the low kick. Aldo, watch the checks because it's really important to understand why they were working. You know, it's not that everyone in MMA is an idiot and checking the kick is really that easy. But most of the time, Sorry, shifting around in my brand new gamer chair, which has given me the right to say the gamer word, so stay tuned. But the checks, we always talk. There are trade-offs with everything, and one of the advantages of the calf kick over the regular low kick, and we talked about this in the Filthy Casuals Guide to McGregor versus Poirier. Little did I know that he was going to snap his fucking leg in half. But one of the advantages is if you pick your leg up in a traditional check, where if they're kicking at your thigh, you move the nasty bony portion at the top of your shin higher and into the path of the kick. If you kick below the knee, you can't drop your leg down. So if you pick your leg up, they're going to come through like low on the shin or the ankle. And you saw that against like Gilbert Melendez. Jeremy Stevens is always the one I point out because he really goes up on one leg like a flamingo, and Jeremy Stevens just kicks through at his ankle. You saw that in this one. Like Aldo was pointing his knee out and hinging his lower leg at the knee, back so that his foot almost tucked into the back of his other leg, into the back of his other knee rather. So he was really just making like a really tight angle and not picking his leg up much at all. And a lot of the time that meant that Pedro Munhoz missed his ankle altogether. But other times it just clacked through at the ankle, and neither man really got hurt badly. That's the thing about it. Like, that is one of the upsides of the calf kick. If the guy picks his leg up, you'll clack through at the ankle and you won't hurt yourself as badly. Probably won't hurt yourself much at all, but you're not going to hurt him. Like, it's not devastating to get kicked in the lower shin and ankle when it's just sort of hanging there flapping. And then other times Aldo would just do the Uriah Hall versus Weidman example, the one that everyone says that you should just do, but it's quite hard to do, which is just turn your knee out and keep your foot grounded. Because you can't lower the top portion of your knee, but where the calf kick connects, about that height on the front of the shin, you're going to fuck yourself up. So you just got to be able to turn your shin out. Problem is that you turn on the ball of your foot, and basically if the kick connects while that's happening, your leg's going flying. So it's quite hard to actually time that well. But Aldo was going between them, looked wonderful, and the thing was that like Munhoz was never able to build on that. Because I don't think, like, this is just something that I've always felt, but I don't think picking up your leg to check a kick is, like, the end of the discussion. That's not like, oh, fuck, I can't low kick now. You've achieved something by making the guy pick his leg up. So you saw a couple of times Pedro Munhoz would throw, like, he'd tap him with the low kick on the check and then throw the right hand, and he'd land it both times he did it. I think it was only two that he actually did, but he'd land the right hand. He just didn't do it much, and it's quite a big sort of feint to do, or a big sort of setup to do, so it's quite obvious. But if you watch the Gane Lewis main event, there's a few where Gane goes orthodox and he feints the low kick, drawing his right foot in a little bit underneath him, and then drives off the right foot with a nice stiff jab. And that's the sort of thing that Munhoz could have been doing. You either short feint the kick and make him do a big motion and then move in on your strikes while he's recovering, or you throw the kick but you half-arse it. Like, you tap his check. You go, okay, I'm going to kick his check, but I'm not going to kick it hard enough to break my own shin. And then you come down after it swinging, And Munhoz was really ineffective doing any of that. And then when so basically his jab was like standing alone at that point, and he couldn't touch Aldo with a handful of rice. The other thing that I loved about this fight was that there was bits. I mean, I could write a fucking article about this, just waxing lyrical and getting really poetic about it. But there were bits of every bit of Aldo's career in this one fight. It was phenomenal. So like right off the get go, Munhoz is doing shit work with his jab and he can't land his low kick. So he goes, okay, I'm going to come in, and he goes like jab and tries to step in with the overhand. Really commits, and Aldo tries to hit him with a knee. And he hits. I think he hit him in the chest, but he could have hit him in the head if it had gone better. But intercepting knees, there was a period in WEC, Mike Brown. Who else did he do with them? But the Mike Brown one is a really obvious one. The first Faber fight, I think, and whoever he fought just before Mike Brown. But he was in love with knee. I mean, he knocked that lad out doing a body jab, and that made people not body jab for until now. It took Max Holloway actually using the body jab effectively against Jose Aldo for people to start going, oh, maybe it's not a death sentence to throw a body jab. Maybe Jose Aldo was just really good and that guy let him know that the body jab was coming. But Aldo was in love with intercepting knees, and you saw that in this fight, and I was like, yes. Aldo's jab always been great since the Frankie Edgar days. His slips and counters, like the difficult part for Aldo was that he wasn't always getting back in on the kicks. Like he'd check the kick and then wouldn't really get anything back from it. But very early on, he did check the kick and immediately go right straight to the body, left hook to the body, and I love that. He was doing lots of right hook, left hook to the body, like the Jeremy Stevens fight. Just watching Aldo do body shots, love it. He hit every time Munhoz stepped in, he would slip his head outside of Munhoz's lead shoulder and come with his shoulder in the center of Munhoz's chest and smother him, and then he'd come out punching, or he'd just pivot offline. He'd slip to the outside and he'd slip to the inside and pivot around his lead leg, like against Edgar, both times. And even, all through the fight, DC's going, why is Aldo not throwing any low kicks? And you're going, have you ever watched a fucking Aldo fight, DC? But it's been a common complaint, like Aldo has these low kicks, or did have these low kicks, and he's really stopped throwing them. And I think part of that is caution, because he hurt himself against the Korean Zombie. We were all running it back going, oh, was it a check? Was it a check? But he just sort of clipped him on the knee, I think it was, and he broke his foot, and he had a really hard time kicking after that. So he got a lot more cautious. It was like Krokop didn't like throwing low kicks because he had a bad experience low kicking once. But in round 3, he throws one low kick, and you can hear the crowd go like, oh, Jose Aldo, low kick, oh. Just a rumble through the crowd. And then he threw a couple more, took him off his feet. Just gorgeous. I was so impressed with this. If you're looking at it like anyone in MMA and you're trying to emulate them, I mean, you can't go wrong with Jose Aldo. He's just so good all around. And I just want to reiterate how insane it is that this dude has been fighting, not just fighting, but fighting the highest level of competition since 2008. He fought Pequeno Nogueira in 2008, and Nogueira was the best featherweight ever at that point. And Munhoz didn't start fighting until 2009. Just imagine being that level for that long. And this is one of the interesting things. I forgot to mention, I'm going to start adding like my sort of ideal matchups post-fight for these things, for the Monday podcast, or I'm going to try to. I always like doing it, but I forget to do it. Derek Lewis, you don't need to know who I'd match him up against. Gane, obviously, and Gane. But for Jose Aldo, it was a fight or two ago. I was going, when was the Petian one? But I was going, a lot of us were going, there's no better time than now to do Dominic Cruz versus Jose Aldo. They're both coming off losses. They're both not really relevant to the title picture anymore. Let's do that. But here we go. Dominic Cruz edged a win over Casey Kenny, who's not ranked, and Jose Aldo just made is he top 5, Pedro Munhoz? He's definitely top 10. A top 10 guy looked like crap. They shouldn't be in the same situation anymore. But I would expect, just throwing it out there, Dominic Cruz is going to start calling for that fight now, because that's the way he gets back into the title picture. There were dudes the other day being like, Marlon Vera doesn't deserve Dominic Cruz. And you're like, what? What were you watching? Dominic Cruz's last fight was against someone hand-picked who also wasn't ranked. And people treat him like he's in immediate title contention all the time. And I say that as a big Dominic Cruz fan, but just what? Jose Aldo deserves. Frankly, he's shown that he can still hang with the top guys. So yeah, just let him hang with the top guys. It was rough watching him lose to Petian in such a brutal style, but that's what happens when you lose to Petian a lot of the time. Gegard Mousasi fought John Salter at the weekend. That was, I suppose, important. A really weird one, because I watched it. I love making fun of Bellator people, but I do watch their significant fights with an eye for how's the talent looking? The other week, I did 2 podcasts on Pitbull versus AJ McKee, where I was completely honest and assessed their skills honestly, and nobody fucking listened to him compared to normal. But the Mousasi stuff is truly bizarre, because I'm watching him slowly circle around the cage after John Salter, losing him after every exchange, not really landing very effectively. And everyone's creaming their jeans about how difficult a fight he'd be for Izzy still. And you're like, how is this different to Marvin Vettori plodding around the ring after him and not cutting the cage? But he basically just outlasted Salter. Salter really wasted a lot of it. The takedown defense looked pretty good, given that that's been one of Mousasi's hang-ups in the past. But Salter just gassed himself out doing very ineffective work and not really having any striking to keep Gegard off him. So back to things that I actually really thought were impressive. Vicente Luque versus Michael Chiesa. I said look out for this one. It's in that pre-fight breakdown, I think we specifically said, he's a bit of a specialist, Luque. As much as he is a fantastic offensive counterpuncher, his Darce choke, he might have the second most Darce chokes in the UFC, I think I said, and I thought maybe Dustin or Tony was higher. Turns out now he has the most, because actually the whole fight was interesting, because Chiesa's striking is generally pretty janky, but he did have success against Jorge Masvidal, of all people, because Jorge Masvidal doesn't like the southpaws, and doesn't seem to like people with a reach on him. But Chiesa came out in this one bouncing side to side, moving laterally and punching straight. And that brought me back to something I talked about in the Igor Vovchanchin Advanced Striking 2.0. I touched on where he got the weird sort of looping punching from. And I think it's probably more likely that he picked it up from a boxing coach, his boxing coach in what was the Soviet Union when he was growing up. And then we got into the grand generalizations about the US boxing team and the Soviet boxing team. But for a long time during the Cold War, the US boxing team were experimenting with lateral movement and straight hitting. And you would see a lot more willingness in Soviet fighters to throw loopier shots rather than just focusing on straight shots. And you'll still see some of that hangover today. Like if you watch guys who've been trained in very sort of traditional Soviet areas like Kazakhstan, Gennady Golovkin throws some very strange punches, like the downward left hook from overhead. He throws a palm down right hook to the body all the time. But the massive oversimplification is that you would see more angles created with a fighter's footwork from the US team, and you would see Soviet fighters be more willing to create the angles on the punches themselves. So we got into that, and then that was what was interesting about this fight. I mean, Chiesa was doing really well, moving laterally and punching straight, and he actually got Luque to walk onto a couple of good punches. And I think the broadcast team said those are the two best strikes that Chiesa's ever landed. But yeah, he was giving him a bit of a pain. But the thing that I liked that Luque was doing was that he was changing to southpaw a lot. You saw it very early on, but he only really got stuck in with it later. And he was doing that one to set up low kicks on the lead leg, because if you've got someone who's running from you, great shout. Outside low kicks, that is. And he went southpaw and he did a nice, as he was, Chiesa was strafing along the fence towards Luque's right. So Luque put his right foot forward, jabbed, and then stepped into a right hook and caught him, doubling up the punch, caught him circling, dropped him on his ass very briefly. And then Chiesa timed a good takedown attempt, got him to the mat, got on his back, looked really bad, and then Luque managed to scramble out and get to sort of top half guard, and Chiesa sort of disregarded the threat in that he tried to immediately go to his knees and wrestle up from half guard. Like he kicked him off and turned into him, and he had his arm across himself at the time. He didn't have an underhook, and that was what got him snatched up straight away in the Darce. And yeah, Luque is a killer with that Darce. I mean, he's worked with Melanson before, and I'm sure the Black Zillions had a few good grappling coaches come through. And I think it was always just one of Luque's favourites. He's been doing that since way back in the day. He did a great one in one of his early UFC fights. He broke the guy down to his knees along the fence, and then he started looking for the Darce, and the guy tried to stand up and posture out of it, and Luque let go of him and elbowed him in the head as he stood up. It was fantastic. Other good stuff. I enjoyed Penne versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Very sad for Kowalkiewicz, but she really did sort of overachieve. I remember when she got the title shot against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, I was thinking, what is going on in this division? But she always had this thing, she could hit decently with her right hand, but when people come close to her, she just sort of pumps her right hand, flails with her left hand so it doesn't have anything on it, and tries to throw the right hand again. And you saw that when Penne closed in on her. You saw it when Jessica Andrade closed in on her. She was closing her eyes against Andrade, which is really bad. But she managed to bundle Penne off her feet, entered the guard, got swept with a body lock butterfly thing. Penne passed a guard, and she went for an over-the-back armbar, which is a fantastic move for MMA if you are very confident. BJ Penn used to do it. Like, BJ Penn, dudes will roll to their front if you're mounted high on them in MMA and try and sort of pike you off from back control. They'll give up their back and come up and sort of put their ass up in the air and their hands on the mat and try and slide, buck you off the front. But BJ Penn used to like reach back behind him and grab the guy's opposite knee and try and convince them to roll. He did it to Jens Pulver in their second fight. So lovely over the back armbar. First finish for Penne in ages, but yeah, she's always been a really fun grappler. Bobby Green versus Fiziev was really interesting because a lot of people saw that as like a derailing of the Fiziev hype train. In fact, I've got two questions about this here. One, hi Jack. Bobby Green is obviously very talented, but seemed to have a lot of issues which Jorge Masvidal once had. What would you suggest he change in order to gain more wins? FYI, this isn't Bobby emailing in for coaching suggestions. Best wishes and keep up the good work, your Patreon boy, Tom. And then I also got, alright, Captain Slackbladder. Fiziev has lots of his Thai fights up on YouTube, and I like to compare his tendencies in Thai boxing versus how he fights in MMA. I've seen a lot of gyms where everyone does a Muay Thai class for their striking with no thought as to how striking for MMA might be different. Do you reckon the adjustments he has made for the cage might serve as a good general guidelines for adapting a Muay Thai-centric striking habits to MMA? Things like strafes constantly with his feet level versus standing in one place, uses his sidestep to sneak his lead foot into punching range, body kicks always thrown hard for less chance of getting snatched up and taken down. Maybe he only gets away with this because he's being fed strikers, ? Low kicks often following directly from his side-to-side movement, especially if the other bloke is too slow to keep up with him. He punches more or less the same in the ring and cage, I reckon, likes his outside slips into heavy swanging combinations. I don't tend to think of fighters as commonly being... I don't tend to think of Thai fighters as being commonly as being long, straight hitters, more like they see punches as a way to secure a finish when your man is in trouble, so focus on hooks. Might make more sense for that, but maybe I'm talking shite. Cheers, pal, take it easy. P.S. Sumo at the Olympics when? And that's from Joe. I'll try and touch on both those as I talk about this fight, but it was really interesting. It was Bobby Green being very good and doing much better than I expected, but also still being hampered by the same shit, It was very interesting because I thought he'd have more trouble with the hard body kicks and high kicks coming at him because he fights with his hands low a lot of the time. He'd have to get them up, and it didn't seem to be an issue for him. He seemed to have a very good read on when they were coming and get his hands in the way. And then off either stance, he's throwing his rear straight, stepping in, shoulder rolling whatever's coming back, and then throwing like a little straight punch afterwards. Dominic Cruz used a good phrase that I hadn't heard before, which is first and third. We're always talking about like jabbing to draw the return or leading to get on the counter. It's the same thing. You jab or lead first. The other guy comes back and you land a good counter on him then. The only problem is that Bobby Green's counters don't seem to be very good. So he'll lead, shoulder roll, and then he'll like brush them with a jab or something as his counter. But the other side of that is that it does seem to make these fighters, even very good, strong strikers like Fiziev, much more cautious. They don't want to get caught with things that they can't see. I thought you also saw like this is probably a prime example of that, like people losing their shit when you say, oh, so-and-so should throw low kicks against a really good kicker. It's always the case with like Donald Cerrone or Edson Barboza or someone like that. I would say, oh, so-and-so should use some low kicks against him. And people will go, what? You can't throw low kicks against a great low kicker. And you're like, yeah, you can. the defense to the low kick is different to the low kick. It's not like I can appreciate it with like a left hook or something like that, where if you hook with a hooker, you're doing it from in the exact range that they need to be to land the hook, and you don't really have time to react. With low kicks, if you're there throwing your low kick and they're reacting, there's a good space of time between them checking and returning normally, and you can step in on them and close the distance and crowd. But Bobby Green was landing good low kicks here. He was landing good teeps. Yeah, I was really impressed. First round was sort of even. Second round, Fiziev really came back. And one of the things that made a difference was we're always talking with guys who like roll and slip and pull and react. If you're relying on your head movement, you're relying on, to a degree, recognizing the patterns of your opponent and having a sort of expectation of what most people will do in that sort of situation. So when he got him to the fence, he threw a left hook, and Bobby Green turned right into another left hook as he doubled it up. Doubling up against guys who like to slip and pull and roll off punches is always a good idea, because they expect left, right, left, right. They're letting you open up, and they expect that pattern. So if you throw two off one side, this is going back to like Killing the King Anderson Silva. But if you throw two off one side, it breaks the rhythm, and it makes it more likely that you'll catch them. Even if they just get caught with a slappy little left hook as they're out of position, the right straight that comes after it is going to be more effective. Because you're also dealing with guys who are very, very experienced under fire, and you're flustering them a little bit. It's like Floyd Mayweather's being a perfectionist thing we used to talk about. Like, if you are doing really well and you're almost perfect, being caught off guard can be a little bit like, it shakes your worldview a bit, when you were at great comfort. But then in the third round, Bobby Green really turned it on and did great work against Fiziev. And I think part of that was because he was opening up with 1-2s and kicks and things. He threw a lovely, because he always throws his rear hand first. He throws a rear hand straight so that he's in range to slip and counter. And he threw a right straight to right body kick, and it landed perfectly on a guy who is brilliant at Muay Thai compared to the vast majority of MMA fighters. I think this fight links in nicely with Angie Hill versus Tisha Torres too, but 2 is in also, and 2 is in the rematch. But one of the things that I've noticed is that fighters really, or MMA fighters really aren't as good at grabbing legs as they should be. Now, yes, it's probably more easy for a Muay Thai fighter or a neck Muay to get another Muay Thai fighter off his feet catching a kick, because he doesn't have to, he doesn't spend his days defending single legs with like the guy cranking the leg up to the shoulder and still trying to get him off his feet. But grabbing a leg off a kick is a great way to stop the guy kicking so much. And you saw Angie did that in a couple of instances. She caught a body kick against her body and finished the takedown. And then she parried a sort of side teep. Tisha Torres was throwing those sort of teeps that are like almost side kicks with the knee pointing sort of 45 degrees upwards. And she parried one of those and pulled it in to the single leg. But you've got to make guys pay for kicks, because if you let them kick for free, they're going to keep kicking, and kicks are big attention-drawing strikes. It's not like Muay Thai where they're scored so highly that even if they're landing on the arms, that it's just like nothing you can do is going to score more highly than that. But it is going to draw people's attention, and also just getting kicked lots, even if you're blocking it, is shit. I would love to see more guys catching kicks. Like if you watch Izzy versus Paulo Costa, Izzy, experienced kickboxer and Muay Thai fighter. But Paulo Costa had been doing amazing work with his body kicks, corralling people, using them to cut the ring, beating people up to the body. Anytime he throws the right body kick at Izzy when Izzy's orthodox, Izzy turns his back, slides, sidesteps slightly to the right, catches it under his arm, not under his arm as in like taking the kick on his armpit and ribs, takes the kick on his back and loops his arm over, and then comes back with a counter combination every time. You don't have to catch the leg and finish a single leg or take the guy down or change it to a double or whatever. But catching the leg is free shots on them if you do it before they've realised that you've caught the leg and you're moving them. But Bobby Green, man, to touch on the Bobby Green question that Tom sent in, one thing I think would be a good idea, and this is this is not what I do. I'm not a coach of fighters. I'm not. There's a degree of like kidology with coaching fighters. You have to know your specific fighter and how they respond. But one of the ways that I think you could trick Bobby Green into doing more is get him to focus on powerful body shots, like just on the back. Just keep show him have him do 1-2s into left hooks or left body rips or left shovel hooks, whatever you want to call them. But 1-2 slide in with the left hook to the body, and have him do that over and over and over again off both stances. And then in those instances, because you saw in the third round, Fiziev was not returning as readily, partly being tired, partly because you don't want to walk onto a counter when you're tired. But in that third round, Fiziev was much more stationary and there for the hitting. And Bobby Green, his reluctance to throw combinations really let him down there. And I think he can, he pokes people with body kicks, and he throws the jab to the body occasionally and the right straight to the body. I loved that he Aldo did this too, but he'd look to the body and punch him in the head, and look to the head and punch him in the body. And Aldo, I forgot to even say, he stole Mendez's uppercut. He moved in to smother the guy with a little level change, came up with the right uppercut afterwards. And he was using the jab to left hook that he was using against Mendez. God, it was just, a tour de force of Aldo fights. But Bobby Green could really benefit from throwing the 1-2 and just come in with a body shot afterwards. Get him sitting down on some punches, because he's narrowly outpointing people, and it's by a narrow enough margin that judges will miss it. I mean, he beat Thiago Moises and lost the decision. He needs to be pushing his advantages, because he's doing this throw a quick left straight or right straight, whatever foot's forward, and or rather whichever foot's back, and then move and try and come back with a counter. And he's not hitting guys with clean counters, so he needs to dig in a bit more. It's like if you watch. It's the difference between Anderson Silva and Conor McGregor. Anderson Silva waited for people to come to him, and eventually they stopped. Conor McGregor went out and flustered the shit out of people, and then they threw punches at him that were shit compared to what they'd throw if they were just standing there looking at him. He flustered them into making bad choices and countered them. And I think Bobby Green's pattern of cheeky darting straight into shoulder roll, guys know that it's coming. They don't want to get caught with a counterpunch. They might throw less, but they do get into that rhythm, and they know it's literally the same thing over and over and over again. If he could dig in a bit more and actually pile up some damage on offense, his counter fighting would probably be much more effective as a result. He'd light a fire under his opponents to get the shots back. Meanwhile, Fiziev, in terms of the Muay Thai for MMA question, I think he's a great example of what Muay Thai and MMA can be. I mean, Muay Thai is a fascinating sport in itself, because it's not boxing is like this too, but in MMA, people tend to treat each combat sport as a style. You're his style's wrestling, his style's Muay Thai, his style's boxing. There's 1,000 different styles in Muay Thai, and they've all got formal names like Muay Cow and Muay something, Muay Tung, Muay Poon. My style is Muay Poon. There's elbow fighters, there's punch. Muay Mat is punching. There's a guy, I can't remember who it was, but he was quite a famous Muay Mat guy, and his move, that he just did over and over again, was jab right straight to the body, and he'd pull his lead hand back like Paul Phoenix, and throw a left straight with a vertical fist to the body, right to the solar plexus, and he was just melting people with that. I'm gonna have to try and remember who it was. Fuck. But yeah, just 2 straights to the body. That was his big blow. And always, when we're talking about Muay Thai styles, shout out to Sylvie, who you can, I support her Patreon, but go to her Patreon. She's got the Muay Thai library, tons of old dudes who are badass, teaching various different styles. And it's really interesting, because if you go to someone who has had success with the style, they have things that they do, and they have their reasons for them. And then she'll go to a different gym, and they'll go, no, why are you doing that? And she'll be like, and I didn't want to tell them that Diesel Noy, one of the best ever, taught me to do it. Dudes had their own styles and their own reasons for doing things. It's really interesting to see, even 2 knee fighters will have very different approaches to how they score the knee. Sorry if it sounds like I'm farting all the time. This new gamer chair is really fucking squeaky. I'm trying to think if there was anything good this week. I mean, Rory McDonald lost to Ray Cooper in PFL. I mean, Rory McDonald has been on the way down for a long time. Even when he was fighting Lima the first time, he just wasn't pulling the trigger. It's weird, because obviously everyone wanted him to be the best because he was in Bellator. But Ray Cooper's a really interesting one, because he's actually been doing pretty impressive things outside the UFC. Obviously, he only gets sort of guys who've left the UFC to show his skills against. But he's been doing very consistently well in PFL over the last couple of years. Oh, there's one more I suppose we should talk about, which is Manel Cape, which was a weird little fight. He managed to pick up a knockout at last to sort of save his career in the UFC. The secret was that he went back to bantamweight, but he signed the flyweight fight first. So he turned up 129 pounds for this 125 pound fight. And that's a dehydrated 129 pounds, I'll remind you. So it's significantly more than you think it is. And Odi Osborne actually looked really good against him. I really enjoyed their little scrap up to the point that Cape landed a really good flying knee. I sent Osborne to the mat, but Osborne was very clearly with it and moving and conscious, and the ref, basically he'd already committed to diving between them, and I don't think he could back up, and because indecision is even worse, to be honest, in a referee. If you watch some of the worse Herb Dean ones where he's standing in the way of them and isn't stopping the fight, but this stoppage was probably a bit premature. But it saves Manel Cape's head, so it's probably worth it. Like, if he can fight with a bit more confidence and urgent. Well, actually, I think the urgency is probably what helped. So maybe it'll just fuck everything up. But if he can fight, like, trying to knock people out from the get-go and actually fight to his potential, then that'll be fun. But I think that's basically everything that really impressed me last week and this week. We got a few things going on this weekend. We got a Bellator with an interesting heavyweight main event between Czech Congo and Sergey Haratanov. We got UFC Fight Night between Cannonier and Nick Gastelum, which is a fun matchup. You also got Clay Guida versus Marco Madsen, old savvy vet wrestler versus monstrous athlete wrestler in the prime of his life. Pantoja versus Royval is on that card rather. Banger. So plenty to talk about, and we'll get all into the bushes, into the reeds in Thursday's podcast. Again, it's going to be a longer one. We're going to do it. I'm going to put it out through the Patreon, and I'll probably put up like a segment of it on the YouTube and on the regular feed. But yeah, hopefully, give the boys something extra. Thanks for all your kind thoughts and messages and things to check I was all right. I promise. And I died of 2 doses of the vaccine. Now I'm good and ready to dive back into it and start grinding out content. Honestly, even if I'm away doing something fun, which I was for most of this, it reminds me how much I enjoy this job. So I'm glad to be back and glad to have some fights on the horizon. I'm your boy Jack Slack. If you want to sign up to the Patreon, check out the extra stuff I do for the Patreon boys. Do that. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, including the Igor Vovchanchin article that you should definitely check out, fightprimer.com. I am your boy Jack Slack. Pretending to be poked in the eye, bless.